and welcome to the semifinals of Grand Prix Las Vegas. On your left is David Heineman, on your right, Simon Kim. These are two of the 4 players remaining in our field of around 4,000 that began just yesterday. Simon appears to have the benefit of the play, being the higher seed following our Swiss.
And so looking at David's hand, we see planes. I believe that's a Frogmite, maybe a Sunlance as well.
Yeah, David Heineman's deck actually has multiple copies of Darksteel Citadel, but also some really color-intensive cards. Normally, the Artifact deck has a really easy mana base. David was telling me prior to this that his mana base is actually one of the sketchy parts of his deck that he's nervous about, is that mana base. So we'll see if that, keep an eye on that as David draws some of the colored spells, whether he has the mana to cast them. Spectral Procession being an example.
Yeah, and then also double blue for Argent Sphinx. Both of the cards mentioned there extremely strong, but they are color intensive. And that Inner Flame Igniter we were talking about before the match coming down for Simon.
Yeah, the bad news here for Simon really is that getting started on turn 3 is not what a deck with Fire Slinger's looking to do. Only able to commit a 2/2 to the board despite having the advantage of playing first.
Yeah, and we are getting word that Simon also mulliganed to 6 in this match.
And that does help explain this somewhat slow start.
Yeah, maybe forced to keep a hand that isn't as aggressive as he might like. We see the Exalted trigger here, +1/+1 to the 2/1. Simon dropped to 17.
Yeah, and Simon, once you've mulliganed to 6, you can no longer really mulligan for aggressiveness versus slow draw. You have to kind of keep anything that's reasonable. Simon's done that. He's got 3 lands and a creature. That one creature will attack. Because of its ability to pump itself, there's no good block for David. He's going to go ahead and take 2, dropping to 18.
Yeah, blocking with the Aethercast Knight, Simon would be happy to spend 3 mana to remove that from the board. Another Igniter, not the best follow-up for Simon because those abilities don't really overlap. 1 is enough. He'd want a higher quality creature to follow up for sure.
Yeah, no 4th land for Simon, also an interesting development as this game goes on. It looks like Blinkmoth Nexus for David Heineman. So we talked about the color mana requirements. I guess one of the reasons he's nervous is the fact that he played multiple Darksteel Citadel and Blinkmoth Nexus alongside those colored mana requirements.
Yeah, all strong cards in his deck powering up. Many cards, Glass Dust Hulk, Glinthawk Idol, many of his Metalcraft cards. So I like including all of them, but it definitely does make me nervous. We see a Sunlance come down, 3 damage to the Igniter, takes it out, and I think we're going to see David
another
coming
3
across
damage
for
attack.
3.
No reason to send the Knight here since they both deal 3 or just the Skimmer does 3. Simon falls to 14. David has a post-combat play. That play is Frogmite.
And so David with a very respectable board here. We saw Simon miss his land drop last turn. He hits this turn, and we'll see what he can follow up with.
Now this turn, if Inner Flame Igniter attacks, Frogmite represents a trade. So we'll see if Simon has anything to do pre-combat or is just going to keep deploying cards to the board. It's a 3rd Inner Flame Igniter.
So those Inner Flame Igniters with Simon a little choked on mana, not the best, but they do trade, as you mentioned, with something like a Frogmite, potentially. If David attacks and gets the Exalted trigger, maybe a double block. I think we're only going to see evasive creatures attack for a little bit here to avoid that double block.
So David has drawn Mirror Enforcer. Now, Blinkmoth Nexus not only becomes a flying creature, it becomes an artifact. So let's see, does he have enough mana he could theoretically send the Blinkmoth Nexus for 2 and then play the Enforcer? I guess that's worse than just sending the Gust Skimmer. So we'll see how David navigates this combat.
Yeah, I think as you said, it's just 1 more damage with the Gust Skimmer. It doesn't leave the Gust Skimmer back to block, but I don't believe we'd see that happening anyway. David had a comfortable 18 life. And blue mana.
Okay, it's activate Blinkmoth Nexus. That means that it's now 4 artifacts for David. 3 mana drops a Mirror Enforcer. Okay, I see what's going on. David wants to attack with a Frogmite. In order to do that, he needs to make sure he casts his Mirror Enforcer pre-combat. He's done that, and he's going to send in both the Frogmite and the Blinkmoth Nexus. This play, I'm not really in love with this play because offering 3 damage is not really as effective as guaranteeing 3 damage by just making Gust Skimmer fly.
Yeah,
But maybe David is actually wants to trade off for one of those Inner Flame Igniters.
He's giving Simon the option to trade. On the other hand, he has less blockers back, but that Mirror Enforcer is probably going to brick wall those Inner Flame Igniters for a bit anyway.
Yeah, so and you know, no difference in the game state because Simon's going to go ahead and take 3 anyways, dropping to 11.
It may be the case that David was just sort of giving Simon the opportunity to make a mistake
Right.
there. And a
Vishino Slaughtermaster.
Yeah, strong with the Igniter, can get its power pumped for 3 mana.
Well, at least hold off that Frogmite. But I have to say David's still in a pretty nice position here with both a bigger ground creature and a couple that have evasion.
Yeah, and I think the card in the back of David's hand is a Swans of Bryn Argol, which is a 4/3 flying bird spirit that when it takes damage, the damage is prevented and you draw that many cards. So really,
Well,
really
the controller
powerful.
of the damage source draws that many cards.
Yes.
So it's a powerful card. It comes with a risky ability. The ability is somewhat upside, somewhat downside. The opponent plays a Tribal Flames or a Burst Lightning, they can start drawing cards. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, there's going to see a flying on the Gust Skimmer and an attack with Frogmite, Mirror Enforcer, and that flying Gust Skimmer.
So it looks like Simon wants to trade his Slaughtermaster for that Mirror Enforcer, giving it an additional power, 2 damage from first strike, 2 damage from normal damage.
Yeah, and that's very reasonable. Although he could have eaten the Frogmite, essentially, with the Slaughtermaster, that, ooh, here we go. For David Heineman, Spectral Procession makes 3 more creatures with flying.
And that Blinkmoth Nexus and that Gust Skimmer represent a total of 6 flying power for David. So the draw, I think I saw Goblin Fireslinger there. As you mentioned, something he really wants on turn 1, but you know, not at this point in the game.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Simon's game plan really never came together following that mulligan. No turn 1 play, no turn 2 play, in a pretty awkward defensive state. And he'll just have to hope for a better draw game 2, it looks like.
Yeah, just kind of a desperation attack here. And we'll see what David decides to do. Probably just running through possibilities, seeing if there's anything he thinks Simon could have. And you know, sometimes you're in this position where you need to offer your opponent the opportunity to stumble in a way that allows you to come back into the game. He's saying, well, maybe you block with multiple spirit tokens.
Yeah, but I don't even know that that's necessarily like he's kind of in a bad spot either way. David's gonna go ahead and block with a spirit token and that Ethercast Knight. So in order to kill both, it requires a double pump from Simon.
So we see the first, he's ordering blockers, Aethercast Knight first. We are gonna see 2 activations, both those cards and the Igniter trade.
Yeah, a smart block from David because not only can he live with the trade, but it's a trade that required the rest of Simon's mana.
Yeah, so not letting him cast anything on this turn. And I think there is just lethal with that Blinkmoth Nexus.
Blinkmoth Nexus represents the 7th damage, and there it is. So game 1 to David Heineman. Amongst the aggressive decks, his draw was just able to kind of curve out much more effectively.
Yeah, we saw him playing cheaper creatures, in the case of the Mirror Enforcer, larger creatures, evasive creatures, and we really only saw those Inner Flame Igniters from Simon, which, given his mana trouble and given that he didn't have much else going on, were pretty anemic in that match.
I think that's right. An explosive draw for Simon. It looks something like Smoke Blader turn 2 or Fire Slinger turn 1. Kind of 2 approaches to having a quick start, but doing nothing turn 1 or turn 2 means that no matter what happens, you know, it's not going to be an explosive start. He'll look to get back in the match by getting on the board early in game 2.
Yeah, he really wants to see a Gorehorn Minotaur come down on turn 4 as a 5/5, or a Blood Ogre come down on turn 3 as a 3/3 first striker.
Yeah, Stormblood Berserker, the same type of card. As long as it's not the first creature to the board, it's a potential significant threat.
Yeah, and I mean, I think David just wants to do basically what he did that game. Play some creatures that Aethercast Knight was great, giving him Exalted, letting him attack more profitably. He has some equipment that we didn't see, so that may become more of a factor in these next 1 or 2 games.
Yeah, David reaching for the sideboard. I think I saw a Celestial Purge and a Gut Shot. Those are both pretty useful tools against another aggressive deck that happens to be red.
Yeah, and we see he does have those cards in his sideboard. The Gut Shot picked up very late, his 12th pick in the 3rd pack. He'll be happy to have that, a nice spell against Viashino Slaughtermaster, against Sky Hunter Skirmisher.
Absolutely.
Even potentially against the Fire Slinger, if it comes down turn 1 and he just says, I don't want to deal with Bloodthirst, get it out, make you play a real creature, slow you down a lot.
Yeah, and as far as what he saw game 1, well, the Viashino Slaughtermaster is certainly a scary card that Gut Shot handles, and the ability to even kill it without spending mana while you're tapped out, it's really attractive. It makes a lot of sense that that card would be sideboarded in. On Simon's side of the board, looking at the sideboard, a Raise the Alarm, a Smash to Smithereens. Now that's certainly a card he'll reach for. Do we see there's a Tarashi's Grasp? So he does have a couple of the red-white tools that add some advantage after sideboard. We saw earlier in the Swiss, multiple players able to create a much better deck against Affinity after sideboard. Simon has at least 2 of those type of cards coming in.
Yeah, I think we'll certainly see those cards come in. They're excellent sideboard cards, as you were mentioning. The Affinity deck, I think, does have that larger advantage game 1 before people can reach for their sideboards. We've seen people prioritizing those cards pretty highly in draft.
All right, Simon will be on the play. Looks at Plains, Mountain. That's enough to keep a couple 2-drops. David Heineman, is it his turn to mulligan? No, they've both kept theirs, opening 7.
So we see a few lands from David. Island, Darksteel Axe, one of those equipment that we mentioned earlier. We also see a Thought Cast that could become very easy for him to cast as this game goes on, and a Soulbright Flamekin from Simon. For now, just a 2-1.
Just a 2-1, but an important aggressive start. You see David Heineman is going to be the one to kind of hiccup a little bit in the early game. That's going to let Simon attack for 2. Dropping David to 18, and we know Simon has at least a follow-up of some kind. It is a second Soulbright Flamekin.
And no 3rd land for Simon, although that does mean his hand is full of spells. I believe I caught a glimpse of a Brute Force there. And so, you know, Simon probably wanting another land, but happy to have a ton of spells there. I think I also saw an Arrest.
Yeah, and just looking at the game state, knowing that Simon misses land drop, I'm still more excited about his board because he's going to start to chip away. Brute Force means he's going to get to keep attacking. Even though he doesn't have a 3rd land, he's already kind of sticking more to his game plan than he was able to in game 1.
Yeah, and we see a Darksteel Citadel and a Frogmite here for David. Only 3 artifacts, so he can't quite cast that Thought Cast yet. And I think we are going to see...
Ooh, a 3rd land for Simon.
Land.
So
great
that's
draw.
going to unlock more possibilities. Simon takes a pauses for a moment to think about how to navigate and attacks with both creatures.
And Simon with the option of that Brute Force here, he will choose to use that, keep that Soulbright Flamekin around, remove an artifact from David's side of the board, lowering the affinity count.
And getting 2 damage in the process. So David down to 16. Simon doesn't have another play with the 2 mana, but he gets to keep his 2 creatures on the board. We'll see how David can answer back. It's going to be Argent Sphinx.
Wow, Argent Sphinx. So I think we'll see that arrested immediately before there is blue mana to blink it.
That certainly seems reasonable to me. Arrest, a card that stops not only attacking and blocking, but really critically here, activated abilities.
Yeah.
So even should David Heineman find a 3rd artifact, Arrest will stop the Argent Sphinx activation, and unless David has a specific answer for Arrest, it's going to stay arrested.
Yeah, and we see if that was something like a Pacifism, it wouldn't be effective. And then I also caught a glimpse of a Smash to Smithereens in Simon's hand.
Wow, a Goblin Warpaint as well. And then is that a Rapid Flame? So a couple different aggressive tools in Simon's hand. as he drops David all the way down to 12. David, I would say clearly on the back foot. We'll see what he can do here.
Yeah, Simon with a lot of ways to make sure that those 2-1s can continue attacking. And David doesn't have many more turns. We see the Thought Cast fired off there, draw 2, Sunlance picked up. Great pickup for David there. Stems the bleeding a little bit from one of those 2-1s.
Absolutely. With only 2 mana left, Sunlance was one of the cards I'm sure David was looking to draw, in that it's going to cut the clock in half in terms of those 2 Soulbite Flamekins. Now Simon only attacking for 2 the following turn.
Yeah, so Simon's still in great shape. I would say able to deploy that 2/2 and then still have that Smash to Smithereens back. I mean, just a key card in this matchup. And between that and the Rapid Flames, there's a lot of surprise damage.
Absolutely. I believe Simon Kim has added a Battle Grace Angel to his hand. It's not castable now, but that means you're going to want to keep an eye on how many lands Simon has. That 4th land makes it a little closer, and then when the 5th land comes, that's a pretty scary bomb in a race type of matchup like we're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. We see Sickle Slicer come down here. We're also going to see, wow, Spectral Procession. Okay, so Simon really wants a land to clean that up with the Rapid Flames.
Yeah, this is going to be a big draw step. Is he going to be Rapid Flames now and 1 closer to Battle Grace Angel, or is it going to be something like a 2/2? Ooh, it's Plains.
Oh, wow, he did draw a Plains. So I think we're going to see the Spectral Procession tokens cleaned up before they can suit up with any equipment or do anything else.
Yeah, Smash to Smithereens can wait. I guess it's somewhat interesting whether any of the creatures are going to attack on Simon's side of the board. I would kind of be inclined to just do Rapid Flames and say go.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to trade off one of his guys for that Germ token, because he does have that Smash to Smithereens potentially next turn, kill the Sickle Slicer, the Germ dies, 3 damage, get through for 4 more, and really put David down to almost no life remaining.
Absolutely. So it's worth mentioning that Modern Masters is a format where the sideboards are incredibly important. That Rapid Flames that was critical came out of Simon's sideboard. Simon, just a very heads up, thoughtful sideboarding plan, and really the perfect answer to that Spectral Procession.
Yeah, it is, on its face a 1-for-1 trade, but the Spectral Procession, a very premium card, and being able to answer a Spectral Procession 1-for-1 is a rare privilege.
Okay, there's the 5th land for Simon.
Yeah.
Now Simon has multiple options, both of which are very effective. Smash to Smithereens would knock out David's only blocker. It looks like that is the way that Simon's leaning. He is going to cast it on Sickle Slicer. David with just a pair of lands, not able to save the Germ. And that's going to spell trouble. 3 life from Smash to Smithereens drops David down to 7. The attack for 4, at least.
I think we're going to see an activation here. Okay,
Blinkmoth Nexus emerges somewhat hidden there from the land, not hidden in a nefarious way, but just maybe perhaps a surprise. 3 damage from the Igniter comes through. David falls all the way down to 4.
So Battle Grace Angel and Goblin Warpaint, the cards for Simon. Glint Hawk Idol comes down here. And we are likely, I would say, okay, what's that last card? Is that another Soulbright Flamekin?
I couldn't tell if it was a Skargan Firebird.
So either play, I think, here, fine. The Battle Grace Angel coming down.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Just because it makes the creature bigger than Glinthawk Idol while deploying a 4/4 flyer in the process, whereas Goblin Warpaint would only really, it would force a chump block, but I don't know, I just like this board state a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, that was a Skargan Firebird. So if he gets another mountain, he'll be able to cast that. I don't think he's going to need it, though, given how this game is playing out. We see David just trying to figure out if there's any way to get out of this. 22 life behind and just scoops it up.
Yeah, does not find it. So we're going to see a game 3. We've had 2 somewhat quick games, as we expected with these 2 aggressive decks. I would say the story so far has been, wow, there's a Tarashi's Grasp still in Simon's sideboard, so he's reaching for that. He's going to rectify that. I think the kind of the tail of the tape so far has been who gets a 2-drop. the first player to deploy a 2-drop in game 1 was David Heineman. The first in game 2, Simon Kim, and that, just that 2 damage becomes 4, becomes 6, has put that player at a distinct advantage.
Yeah, it's really which player can start attacking first, which player can put the other on the back foot. We do see Simon considering, I believe, a Blinding Soul Eater, and as you mentioned, a Tarashi's Grasp also. Both cards that are, in the case of the Tarashi's Grasp, great against what David's doing. And in the case of the Soul Eater, I would say a lot of people just consider that one of the strongest commons in the set.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Cards like, maybe now on the draw, he could look at trimming some of the expensive cards between Skargan Firebird and Battlegrave's Angel. I mean, do you need all those effects? Although, I will say Skargan Firebird is pretty attractive when you have Fire Slingers in your deck.
Yeah, we may also see, so we could see him go that way. We might also see him cut a couple of the low drops and try to play a little slower game, try to maybe win with that Angel and that Firebird with David being on the play. But he saw Thoughtcast, and I think with the equipment, David is better set up to play a long game. So I'm not sure how I feel about Simon cutting his early drops. I think we saw him cut a Smoke Braider.
Yeah, I think a Smoke Braider got cut. Although it does provide elemental mana, and Simon has a number of elementals, you don't need to ramp into 2 mana and 3 mana elementals. So I can certainly see Smoke Braider being a non-essential piece, despite Simon having a number of elementals in the deck.
Yeah, and it doesn't, with the 1/1 body, match up particularly well against what David's deploying. It's not like it's likely to trade for things, considering the Frogmite we saw and the 1/1s that we did see being flying creatures. So both players just finishing, shuffling up here, about to see their hands for the 3rd game of this semifinal match at Grand Prix Vegas, presented by Channel Fireball, and we see the opening hands. See a few lands for David. And Simon looking at his hand.
If you're just joining us, I'm Matt Sperling. I've got Ben Hayes with me in the booth, and this is our semifinals here at Grand Prix Vegas, one of our 2 semifinals. We're gonna have live coverage of the finals next round, and this is the final game between David Heineman and Simon Kim.
So starting off again with a Darksteel Axe, but this time he does have a 2-drop that can start attacking. We see Simon.
Okay, Simon now does have a creature he could play in Stormblood Berserker. It's not the card that you love to play on turn 2, but sometimes the situation demands it. Simon thinks that this is one of those situations, and he is going to play Stormblood Berserker without Bloodthirst.
Yeah, it looks like he thinks he needs to get that down, attack through with it, hopefully get through, maybe power up that Blood Ogre next turn.
Yeah, and let me state one more time that prior to the match, David Heineman was worried about the colored mana requirements on some of his spells. Taking a glance at his hand, Argent Sphinx requires 2 blue mana. David has not even drawn his first source of blue mana.
Yeah, and 2 of the lands in his hand producing colorless mana, so definitely something he's considering that, those could be basics, but he chose, and I think wisely, to play those. They power up so many of the cards in his deck. Looks like we're going to see him consider which land to play. The Darksteel Citadel would... Okay, he goes with the Blinkmoth Nexus and a Tumble Magnet. When an artifact enters the battlefield, Glinthawk Idol becomes a 2/2, comes across, dropping Simon to 18, but this does open the door potentially for Bloodthirst. We'll see if he chooses to use that counter.
Yeah, I think that'll be a really interesting thing to watch. Knowing that the red deck plays Bloodthirst, Tumble Magnet could either, retain 3 counters, and that's what you're going to see. So David's going to keep all 3 counters on that. That turns on Blood Ogre. It might be an instant regret there for David Heineman. We'll see. Blood Ogre is going to get a Bloodthirst counter and go up to a 3/3 first strike.
Yeah, on the one hand, you want to get maximum value out of the Tumble Magnet, wait till you can tap larger creatures. But knowing that there are those Bloodthirst cards, it's definitely a much closer decision. It's not just 1 damage being represented, it's 1 damage and the Bloodthirst of whatever Simon has in his hand being turned on.
And in terms of the damage race here, David can attack for 4 evasive flying, but he has to pay at least two every turn in order to do that because Glinthawk Idol and Blinkmoth Nexus require activation. Spectral Procession is a pretty big development here. 3 spirit tokens, that's additional flying and additional ability to block.
Yeah, and the Darksteel Axe going much better on a token than on that Glinthawk Idol, which he would have to equip it to every turn as it turns back and forth from an artifact into a creature.
Simon Kim's hand contains a Battle Grace Angel, so each player with a rare first pick card and not a single mana towards the double mana requirement. So I guess that's, that's something that both players are struggling with. They're going to have to see what they can do with the remaining cards that each of them have drawn.
I think I see a Smash to Smithereens in Simon's hand, so I wonder if we'll see that, or it looks like he's going to just drop the Inner Flame Igniter there.
So he must see himself still as kind of the aggressor, choosing to play a creature instead of stopping, say, Glinthawk Idol.
Yeah, and we're going to see David with a blue source now, consider his options, and Glass Dusk Hulk. Pretty good here, 3/4 blocks on the ground. Not necessarily going to be able to block that Blood Ogre.
But just a really, I think, a powerful card in that we're now in what's essentially a damage race. Not only do David's creatures have flying, but that Glass Dusk Hulk, as soon as an artifact hits the battlefield, it represents 4 unblockable damage. Simon draws a Gorehorde Minotaur. It doesn't really match up well against Tumble Magnet, and it doesn't really combo well with Goblin Warpaint.
I think Simon may be in a position where he needs to smash to smithereens that Glass Dusk Hulk to not lose this race. Because an artifact on David's side next turn would mean 9 damage coming across that Simon has no way to block.
So Simon starts off with a Goblin Warpaint. Now Tumble Magnet can only stop one of the 3/3s, not both. And I believe he's declared his attack. David's going to think about how to use that Tumble Magnet. And there you see Stormblood Berserker tapped, Smash to Smithereens, the Glass Dusk Hulk. Wow, this looks like it's going to be a really tight race.
Yeah, so interestingly, he declared attacks first because Smash to Smithereens is an instant. If David had felt like, okay, I can sit back on this 3/4 blocker, all those would have turned sideways, and then the smash would have hit the Glass Dusk Hulk. Smart by David to tap, even though there wasn't necessarily an onboard way to get around the blocker.
So David has drawn 1 island since we last talked about that Argent Sphinx. I don't think he's drawn the second one yet, but like I said, you're going to want to keep an eye on that. As soon as the second island is drawn, another flyer joins the board. I think instead of that, we've got a 1/3 Knight.
Yeah, the Aethercast Knight, a 1/3 artifact creature with Exalted. Also, that Darksteel Axe there, threatening 2 more points of damage, and a Blinkmoth Nexus. So if David wants to sort of go all in here, he could deal 3 from the Spirits, 2 more, 1 from the Nexus.
So for a total of 8 damage.
Yeah, I believe he could come across for 8, leaving Simon at 3. But that would completely tap him out, except for the Tumble Magnet.
And I don't think David's actually at 16. I think David is probably at 11. So he's going to, I expect, play a little bit more cautiously than do the full 8. It is going to be 7.
So it's going to be 7, but he did deploy that Aethercast Knight just off screen. So he has an additional blocker here beyond what you can maybe see right on the camera.
Yeah, and between a Tumble Magnet and a blocker, it's unlikely that Simon's going to be able to deal the last, what I think is 11 damage he would need to finish off David.
Yeah, and Simon with that first planes, but needing 2 to cast the Battle Grace Angel.
Yeah, only having drawn 1 planes this game is huge, because now the life gain ability of Battle Grace Angel is just unavailable to Simon. He's now staring down at a board that really presents him with lethal damage that I don't see a way out here.
Yeah, the Battle Grace Angel great in a racing situation with that lifelink, but it just didn't happen for Simon this game. We'll see what play he comes up with. I imagine that Tumble Magnet will be used, given that David is presenting lethal. He just wants to make sure to not accidentally die.
Yeah, so the attack is going to be declared. Tumble Magnet stops the first creature, but the other two will come in. Just don't know how Simon's situation can improve this way. Chump Block here from Ethercast Knight. Gonna get 3 points in on his way out. David falls to 8.
And it looks like David with more than enough flying creatures.
Yeah, David really, his deck really performed well. I think all 3 games. He lost game 2. I think Rapid Flames was a card that was critical for Simon, but just each game, David had a really consistent, proactive plan, and in game 3, it was just too much for Simon.
Yeah, even in game 2, he played some pretty strong spells, and Simon had the right answers. But I think David's deck just coming together better here. We see the Blink Moth Nexus moved up. We see the Glintalk Idol activated, attack, and there's the handshake. So David Heineman wins that 2-1, and is going to advance to the finals of Grand Prix Las Vegas.